The Observer.
Hello, and welcome to The Observer Book Club. It's great that we're all here, and we are going to, first of all, welcome you and welcome everyone watching online. Thank you very much for joining us for this discussion, and I'm going to give an extremely warm welcome to our guest who is here with us today because particularly and especially exciting for me, for reasons I'll explain later. So I'm the arts correspondent of The Observer, and we're here to discuss the new book by Elizabeth Day, which is called One of Us. And I can now introduce you to Elizabeth, who's joining us to chat generally, but also to talk a little bit about this new book, which is a real page-turner and tackles some fairly burning issues. It's about privilege, and I think we are privileged in a good way to have you here today. Elizabeth's top-ranking podcast, you'll probably know, How to Fail, is also accompanied by her career as an author. I think you've written 10 books so far. And also, I've been told, and I'm very intrigued, been involved in launching a clothing line recently, which we can ask a bit more about later. And after studying at Cambridge, she wrote for The Observer until around 2016, I think. And her best-selling book, How to Fail, came out shortly after that, with a companion book that some of you will know called Failosophy. And they both cleverly used a lot of the ideas and wisdom of her podcasts to give practical tips. I mean, a lot of them are pretty practical, I think, about how to cope with failure, which is something we all encounter in any life to one degree or another. And she's got a new hit podcast, Best Friend Therapy, which is also doing incredibly well. Now, it's particularly pleasant for me to invite Elizabeth here, as I hinted earlier, because it's a bit of a reunion. It's an unusual situation for an interview and possibly a bit risky that we actually used to work together at The Observer and share an office and, in fact, almost really share a desk for a few years. And it's also daunting because Elizabeth is the master, or probably should say mistress, of the interview, and you've done many fantastic print interviews and also now, of course, in the podcast. She's interviewed big names beautifully, like Kate Winslet and Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Gloria Steinem and Simon Callow, Simon Cowell even.
Both Simons, actually.
Yeah, you've done them both.
Yeah.
A doubler. Not often you get Gloria Steinem and Simon Cowell into the same sentence. But, so I don't know whether I don't think you turned your back on journalism, we'll find out in a minute. You've talked about it as being a little bit like an ex-boyfriend, that you're sort of happy to keep on good terms with, but don't really hanker after. I'd say your books are known for their slightly acerbic tone, and their insights. So when we talk about One of Us, I think you won't be surprised to know that it's quite revealing about the English establishment in particular. And it reads like a thriller, really, as I think anyone who starts it will be drawn on. But it's also covers some fairly important things about how this country is run publicly and about the private lives of some of the people that do it. It's sardonic, but it's also delightfully silly at times. And it's a sequel to a book some of you may have read, The Party, but you can read it, I think, without having read that. It's about two friends from different worlds who are joined even when their friendship slightly sours. And it tackles the sort of spiral of doom towards the end. Who knows, there may be a third book. And I don't want to give anything away, but that's the sort of area. And I'm going to crack on now by asking Elizabeth a couple of things, but if you think of questions, I will ask for questions a bit later on from the audience, so if you put up your hand, I'll be able to make sure a mic gets to you, and if you want to ask Elizabeth something. Now, was there anything in that description of, first of all, you, that you disagree with? Which bits of your personal CV do you think led most directly to writing books?
First of all, a great question that is. Thank you for that introduction, which I feel is completely accurate, which doesn't always happen, and also incredibly generous about the book. So, and ditto, it's lovely to be reunited with you again on the same table.
Yeah, we could almost.
And sorry, I was too busy focusing on the compliments. You asked, like, which of those aspects of my career?
Yeah, I mean, do you feel that the journalism feeds into
Yes,
your writing?
absolutely.
I would say, because you skewer things so well.
Yes, I think
in contemporary life.
journalism helped me and continues to help me in so many different ways. Partly because my first job out of university was on the Londoner's Diary and the Evening Standard, which many of you might know is a sort of highbrow gossip columnist. And it was an incredibly intimidating environment for someone who just turned 22 to be sent to these high-octane celebrity parties and to have to bowl up to well-known people and try and get an amusing tidbit for the next day's paper. And it was very helpful in teaching me how to connect quickly, but also how to ask the right questions. And at that stage, my favourite question was, who do you think is going to be the next James Bond? Because the British are completely unhealthily obsessed with who the next James Bond is going to be. And whatever they say makes a news story. Either they'll say, well, I think it should be James Norton, or they'll say, I don't know. But either way, it's a news story.
And it's still being used now.
Exactly, exactly. And I think the other thing that journalism taught me was the art of listening. And I always remember our great former colleague, Lynn Barber, one of the most amazing interviewers of all time, talking about the power of silence. And for me, what interests me as a novelist is often the stories that people tell about themselves and the stories that they don't, because they're in some kind of denial. So all of that training really, really helped. And then on a more practical level, bless you. Don't worry at all. It's a very wet day. Journalists are observers, and we have an enormously privileged position in that we are often invited into rooms or to talk to people that we might never otherwise get access to. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I'm drawn to the Observer in fiction. So Martin Gilmore, who opens One of Us, is a quintessential observer. He's someone who yearns to belong, but has never fully been able to, because, potted version, he's a scholarship boy from a working class background and a single mother family. And he gets very drawn into this world of elitism and privilege, and he becomes unhealthily fixated with his best friend, the aristocratic Ben Fitzmaurice, who in One of Us is on course to become the next Tory Prime Minister. And Martin Gilmore, as the Observer, he's actually a former journalist himself, is drawn back into this world that has this dark underbelly to it, and yet he can't help being hypnotised by its glitziness and glam. So I think it also, the observer quality of a journalist has definitely played into the themes that I'm interested in as a novelist.
And they got their hooks into you a bit as characters, obviously, because I think you've said that the idea for returning to them was born of an afternoon of drinking rosé with your husband.
Yes.
But so what was the clincher? Was it not the second bottle? But I mean, what was the thing that...
Always a good idea.
Yeah. Yes. What was the thing that made you think you could go back to them and spin the story out, roll the dice again, really?
Well, it was a couple of things. So when I wrote The Party and it came out in 2017, I would do lovely events like this one, and I would go to literary festivals, and the question I would most often get asked is, and apologies if this is a spoiler alert, but it's not going to ruin your enjoyment, does he kill the cat? Because The Party ends with Martin Gilmore stroking a cat in a somewhat sinister fashion. And I was so horrified as a cat lover myself that anyone could think that he would kill the cat, that it was almost like I have to write a sequel to show that the cat survived. So the cat makes it, not only makes it, but is immortalised on the cover. And then the other thing that just kept coming back to me was how much had changed politically and culturally since 2017. So when I was writing The Party, I was writing it against a political backdrop of David Cameron and Theresa May. Brexit hadn't happened, the election of Trump and the re-election of Trump hadn't happened, and neither had the pandemic. And all of those things have so shaped who we are and how we show up in the world that I wanted to look at where my characters were within this new political context. And it was such a rich scene that the more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh, there's so much that I could develop. The rise of podcasting, the rise of reality TV in terms of a rehabilitation vehicle for errant politicians, all of that I felt very enthused by. And you're right, that the genesis of the idea was when Justin, my husband, and I had gone to Mallorca for a long weekend, and we got one of those early flights and our room wasn't ready for us to check in. And so we had this lunch of paella accompanied by lashings of Whispering Angel. Other rosés are available, but not as good. And he said to me, oh, what are you going to write next? And it was the first time I'd kind of verbalised it. And the more that we talked about it, the more I realised I wanted to write it.
And it's obviously very closely mirrors, shall we say, some political things that have happened. But it cleverly turning it in a different way in the light quite often. But have you had any comeback from politicians that have read it, or?
Not yet.
Yeah, because betrayals, public betrayals as well as private betrayals play a big part.
Yeah.
We all remember moments, shock press conferences when people who were supposed to be backing people decided not to. Yeah, there's also a mention of a political oriented publication called The Witness, which bears a close resemblance to The Spectator, I think I might venture.
Yes.
And so I just wonder, are you braced slightly for people? There's also a dark rock hedge fund, which...
I love how closely you've read it, yes. I'm not really braced because everything that I've put in the book did happen in one way or the other. Obviously, I've written about it through the lens of fiction, but I was very inspired by something that Margaret Atwood said to me when she came on How to Fail. And she said when she was writing The Handmaid's Tale, which, as all of you know, is this dystopian futuristic novel, she also did not write anything that hadn't already happened or wasn't already happening in the world. And in a way, I was deliberate about doing the same thing because I wanted to hold a mirror up and I wanted people to think, yes, it is so ludicrous and so hilarious that this disgraced MP, Richard Take, in One of Us, who is caught watching porn on his work computer and he's lost his front bench seat, can go on a reality TV programme called Shit Happens, where he goes undercover as a sewage worker and there are various challenges and he ends up sort of covered in human excrement, that he can use that to become rehabilitated and familiar in the public consciousness and then launch his own bid for a leadership. That is absurd, and it's also entirely true. So I did want to...
Yeah, it's totally close to the truth.
Yes.
And you've always been, I remember, a student of the way that reality TV was shaping our view of the world and its incredible power.
Yes.
And I can't remember one of your first... whether it was The Island of Love.
Yes. It was Real Housewives. I love that you remember this about me because, and I love that you call me a student of reality TV because I could do a PhD in it. When I was at The Observer, and I can't remember what year it was, but it was early, it was probably like 2009 or something. I remember going to the then editor of the New Review saying, I have got to write a piece about the Real Housewives. And she was like, what? What's that? And I was like, it's on ITVB, which is a TV channel that doesn't even exist anymore in the UK. I was like, but I'm completely obsessed with it. And it's sort of Dickensian in the complexity and rigour of its plot lines. And I was trying to sell it to her, and I had to sell it to her for months and months and months. And eventually she was like, okay, fine, go and write your Real Housewives piece.
Well, we're all there now. We all understand it now.
Yes. And I think what I love about reality TV and why I find it deeply important as well as very entertaining is because at its best it is a kind of anthropological study of what makes humans tick, what makes them act in unlikable ways and how they interact in groups that they might not always choose to be in.
Absolutely.
And I think that it does something very potent. I mean, we live in a culture where the President of the United States was made familiar because he was on primetime TV through The Apprentice. And so my contention would be the electorate became so accustomed to him that his, I would posit, sort of dangerous behaviours are able to be assimilated as kind of eccentricities of a crazy but familiar uncle that you might see at a family event. And we also exist in a culture where Kim Kardashian is now a fully fledged lawyer and is freeing people from death row. And so all of that stuff is fascinating. And I think that we dismiss reality TV or are snobbish about it at our peril.
Absolutely, because it will pop up in our lives, whether we are aware of it or not. So we ought to really be aware and watching the stories it's telling. Before I ask for questions, if anyone's considering putting their hand up, I'll have a look around in a moment. One thing I don't want to not have the time to ask you is about, it's related in a way, it's about, because your podcast is so personal often, and I know that you've had views in the past about women often having to talk about themselves as a subject, and you've managed to cleverly negotiate those corners into an honest and very successful way of talking about life and mental health. But do you have to create boundaries, and how do you think women should do that within writing and within journalism and broadcasting?
Gosh, well, thank you for the sensitivity of that question. And I have created what I like to call ring fences, which is slightly different from boundaries, in that I do think I'm quite a porous oversharer. So, and that for me is important, because for me vulnerability and authenticity is the source of all true connection, and that's really what gives my life purpose and meaning, is connecting with others. But there are certain topics that I ring fence, that I choose not to talk about publicly, and it's mainly because those topics involve other people. So I'm a stepmother of 3, and it would be really awful for me to sort of bring that into the public forum without their consent. And that's really my guiding principle. So if I ring fence those topics, I don't talk about them. But if I choose to talk about something or write about it, then I fully commit to that. And I commit to showing up authentically and as my flawed self. And actually my experience of doing that, which dates from just after The Observer, because you and I will know, because we came of age in a very traditional school of journalism, where the kinds of interviews I was writing, it was horrifying to bring in a personal pronoun. It was all very much about the person you're interviewing, and I think that's wonderful, and I really respect that school of journalism, and I still think it should be about the person you're interviewing. But starting the podcast, I would get listeners very early on saying, we like it when you share something of yourself, because it feels more like a conversation. And that was such an eye-opening moment for me, and that's when I started experimenting with opening up a bit more. And I found that the thing that I had thought of as uniquely personal or shameful in some way, the fact that I'd got divorced, the fact that I'd tried and failed to have children, and I'd gone through miscarriages and unsuccessful fertility treatment, actually, when I chose to share it, it had more universal resonance than I could ever have imagined. And that resonance gave me such catharsis at the same time, because it made me feel less alone. And I think that's the thing about shame and fear and our attempts, our noble attempts often to be perfect and to perform perfection, come from this fear that if we reveal our true selves, we won't be loved and we won't be accepted and we won't belong. And to discover that actually it was the opposite that was true, that perfection is this sort of shellac-like exterior that no one can penetrate, and it's very boring. To discover that the opposite was true, and that actually that's where I forged the deepest, most meaningful connections, and have been brought into contact with an incredible community of people who have endured similar experiences, has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. And it's actually given me the meaning that I feared I would lack not being a mother.
Absolutely. Yes, I think listeners do get that sense. And for me personally, it's just a huge, brilliant sort of twist that you've managed to, because women are made to talk about themselves more, and you've managed to make it work in a very authentic and useful way, which is a particular pleasure to me to see.
And I also think, to your point, that very often women are encouraged to write or talk in a way that bathes them in their own pain.
Yeah.
It's like we love nothing more than a wounded woman who has made mistakes and is still haunted by them. And actually I'm really passionate about showing that you can be wounded, and you can also survive life's challenges, and you can live alongside the sadness that that might cause you, and you can find that empowering in so many ways. Like, every single failure I have ever experienced has taught me something meaningful in the fullness of time. And everyone here has survived 100% of their worst days and their most difficult challenges. And I think there's something really powerful about that. And so that's what I seek to concentrate on when I write or talk about
Absolutely,
things.
it really does link us all, and the phony stuff doesn't. Does anyone have a question from the floor? I think I can just about see.
Here at the front.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We'll bring a mic over if you just hang on a sec, it's coming. Thank you.
Hiya. What would you say your writing process is like, from conception of the idea to handing in the finished manuscript?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I don't always drink Whispering Angel when I'm conceiving of an idea. It's very hard to know where ideas come from, but I have got a lot of inspiration, I think because of my background in journalism, from news stories. And sometimes it's just the kernel of something that lodges in my head. And I learn to pay attention to it if it doesn't dislodge, if I allow it to percolate over sort of days and weeks and months and it's still there. And I'm a huge advocate, if you're a writer or a creative in any way, of allowing yourself time just to be without actively having to do. So spending time staring out of the bus window and seeing how other people live their lives and just sort of being in life, I think is incredibly important and is part of the process for me anyway. So I'll generally have the seed of something that doesn't dislodge, and it will probably start with a character's voice, and then I want to explore that voice as soon as possible. So I'm not someone who plans everything out to an infinite degree, and I know that there are incredible writers who I really admire who do. Like William Boyd, before he wrote Any Human Heart, spent 5 years researching that book before he even put pen to paper. I don't have time to do that, so I like to start writing as soon as possible. I have an idea in my head of where it's going to start, what the characters are going to go through, and broadly where it might end. But the reason I leave myself that freedom is because often my characters, when I get to know them, will do something that surprises me, but that feels authentic to them. And then in very practical terms, because I also do other things, I don't have a set routine. And I think we live in an age where routines are fetishized and they often put people off, because the reality is that most of us can't afford to just become a full-time author. And so I've written all of my books with other full-time jobs. And so my process is I will write whenever I get an opportunity, whether that's on a train, of a weekend, in a coffee shop. I like to go somewhere different to write, so I will often write in cafes and be surrounded by the murmur of other people's noise. And then I have a deal with myself that I have to write 1,000 words. And it doesn't matter how long that takes or how annoyed the baristas are getting with me. I have to write 1,000 words, and I have to try and suspend my inner critic while I'm writing those words. Because I know that one of the great privileges of writing a book, rather than writing journalism, is that the next time I open my laptop, I can go back and edit them and reread them. And in that way, if you commit to the 1,000-word rule, you actually build up quite a sort of healthy cauldron of words that you can work with quite quickly. And so then I will write the whole manuscript before I show it to anyone, although that's changed recently because I've got terrific new agents, one of whom is here tonight. There she is, yeah. And they now give me amazing feedback, and so then I will redraft, and that's basically the process.
Are you slightly surprised when you see similar themes coming up?
Yes.
With gaps with different books, maybe that don't plough that particular furrow. But that obviously class is a big concern in this country and in your head.
That's such a good question, because I never know what I'm writing about until I've written the book, and someone else tells me. So class, I was never aware that that was an obsession of mine, but it totally is a recurrent preoccupation. It comes up in every single one of my books. And I think that's because of my own personal history. I speak with a very English accent, but I actually moved to Northern Ireland in 1982 when I was 4, with my doctor dad, who'd got a job in Atna Hospital in Derry, and I never fitted in. And then I got a scholarship to a boarding school in England, and I fitted in immediately just because of my accent. But obviously I didn't know the codes of the class system because I hadn't grown up with them. And so clearly I find that really fascinating. The other thing that I'm fascinated by is an unreliable narrator. I find that a satisfying thing to read also, because it entices the reader into the dialogue that you're having with the story, because you're sort of putting clues together as you go. I think I'm very interested in how women are often scapegoats for all sorts of nefarious goings-on perpetrated by men. Apologies to the men in the audience tonight. You're all lovely. And I'm interested in absence because I'm also very intrigued by memory. So if a character has died or has gone missing, how do other people remember them, and how accurate is that memory? And if a story is untold or repressed, how does that shape the character who isn't telling it?
Yes, and I think current interest in class, and it doesn't ever fully go away across culture, but you can think of things like Saltburn or White Lotus. It's interesting that there's a particular sharp point to it at the moment.
Yes.
And it's a way of talking about anger as well, which
yes.
is always a great driver of human behaviour and is very evident in this book.
Do you know what? Yes, that's a great point, because there's probably a lot of anger also. I examine anger, but as a woman who came of age in the 80s and 90s, I'm not practiced with admitting my own anger. It feels safer to mask it as sadness or fear or something. But clearly that's something I do explore.
Yes, you do. In
yeah.
This book. Well, not just the women, but particularly the women are very aware that they're hiding levels of anger.
Yes.
And exhibiting it one through protest, actually. There's quite a lot about climate change and protest in this book too. Are there any other questions? Oh, yes? Perhaps this lady in the third row first, and thank you.
It's me, the sneezer. I just want to say, first of all, that thank you for your writing and your words, which I honestly think saved my life maybe about 5 years ago when I was going through a very rough patch, and I listened to all your podcasts on failure and philosophy and how to fail. So thank you for every time you've wanted to write when you've not feel like writing and things. You've helped so many people. I just wanted to write. So I got myself from the pits of unemployment. I'm now an academic at Oxford Uni writing and researching gender studies. And I know this is maybe a bit off-grid, but you may have read in the press last week that Emma Watson was talking about how the pressure to get married is violence against young people. And I was just thinking about it in terms of your notions of failure and things. And do you think there is a pressure on young people to get married young, and then when it doesn't work out, we then, because I also had a divorce in my 20s, that there's like this notion that we beat ourselves up forever and feel like a failure for something that maybe, when we look at the wider kind of pressures in our lives, was not something we'd probably ever have chosen to do in the first place if it wasn't for those pressures. And just, do you think there's a bit of a, like, self-harm kind of cycle in beating ourselves up about things that were outside of our control? And then I had a second question, but I'll wait.
Okay, great. Thank you. What's your name?
Kate Bancroft.
Kate, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for being courageous enough to still be here. That is like the most meaningful thing you could ever say to me. I don't think, I'm going to disagree with Emma Watson, I don't think it's violence. I do think, though, because of all my work on failure, the way that I define failure is the gap between the life that you think you're going to live, or the life that you've been socially conditioned to believe you are owed, or the life that you have inherited from your culture or your family. It's the gap between that and life as it really turns out. And sometimes that gap can be incredibly painful. And I would argue in terms of marriage that so much of the pressure to marry is a form of social conditioning that dates from bygone eras when there were very different priorities. And I don't know about your experience, but when I got married the first time, I really did think that I knew myself. Spoiler alert, I didn't, because I actually hadn't had enough time to grow into my own identity because I was so busy being an inveterate people pleaser and trying to keep the peace and sort of outsourcing my sense of self to other people in my life and trying to make them happy. And I just hadn't ever realised that that was a dysfunctional way to live. And you kid yourself you're being selfless, but actually it was selfish for me not to get to know myself before getting married. And because of the social conditioning, there is still so much shame attached to it. And I definitely experienced that myself. And I was horrified and mortified simultaneously. And I did view it as a failure. And now looking back on it, I'm grateful for the experiences I had in that marriage. And I don't view a relationship as a failure simply because it ends. And I suppose the way that I look at it is that it's a path that I had to go on to get to know myself and live life more fully. And the amazing thing about it was I went through such panic when I got divorced and such uncertainty, and like I wasn't sure we were doing the right thing, but on the other side of that panic about the future, because I was 35 when I got divorced, and like being in your late 30s going on the apps for the first time as a woman is not great. But there was a massive opportunity there, because the life that I'd been socially conditioned to want told me I should get married and I should have children, and neither of those things had happened in the way that I thought they were going to. And so when it's not happening the way that you've been conditioned to believe you want it to happen, you're offered this opportunity to be like, well, what life do I actually want, and how might I do things differently? So now I'm very grateful for it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Do you had another question?
Yeah.
If it's a briefer one, just so that the lady in front can...
Yeah.
It was just
Look at you, so nice.
do you ever get, you're such a fluent public speaker and you never seem to stumble your words or anything.
That's nice.
And I was
Thank
wondering,
you.
do you have any techniques like before particular big speeches or when you interviewed, for example, Kate Winslet, that have really helped you over the years that you could share?
Do I? Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment, because it doesn't feel like that in my head. And that is something I would like to share with everyone, is that I feel nervous and like an imposter every single time I do an interview. And there are times when I'm in an interview where I'm asking a question and I'm like, oh my God, I can't think how I'm going to finish this question. What word is the word that I want to use? And then I feel like a blubbering wreck. And it's been so interesting doing the podcast, because people like you were kind enough to say those things. And it's made me realise that we're so hard on ourselves, and we also understand internally what neurotic messes we are. And we live in a culture where we can compare our neurotic insides with everyone else's seemingly perfect exteriors. And so actually I remind myself of that disconnect, that the chances are, unless you're a sociopath or maybe Donald Trump, and maybe that's an oxymoron or like a tautology. You see, I told you I didn't get the right words. The chances are that other people are feeling that nervous too. And so that's what I remind myself, and that's what really helps. And sometimes I think we can get in the way of what we want to say by overthinking it. And so the more that I grow in this space, the more that I will always prepare an infinite amount. But given that preparation, I then want to allow myself to be fluid in an interview setting or in public speaking, to be able to say what the occasion might need. So I don't want to sound too woo-woo, but that kind of, like the feeling that I get from when someone asks me a question or what the evening energetically feels like, I try to be open to that too. Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you. I just had a question about, I just had a question about because you do switch in between non-fiction, either non-fiction books or journalism or podcasts, but then you're also writing creative fiction. And I'm curious about what that process is like. Do you feel like you have to sort of say, today I'm doing X and tomorrow I do X, or is it more fluid? Do you feel like they complement each other? Just in terms of, it's such an interesting creative process to do the both non-fiction and fiction. So.
Yeah, thank you. So I would love to be the kind of person who allots a day a week to each specific task. And I'm not that person. Primarily, but no, and we need to be compassionate with ourselves, because life isn't like that. And also, if you're doing a podcast where you're at the behest of celebrity schedules, like there's just no way you can have your own routine. So when I'm writing books, I definitely would not write fiction and non-fiction books at the same time. So that's very, very distinct. But I do actually think that everything I do is connected, in that it's all about questioning our humanity and what life really is and how to bring it meaning. So when I'm doing a podcast interview, I get this incredibly privileged seat into what makes another human tick. And that's an amazing thing to use in my understanding of character in fiction. And it also plays into what I was saying before about the creative process. Being in the world is very helpful for all kinds of creativity. So I think it all bleeds into everything else. And I've also learnt not to question it. Like, if I instinctively feel something will be stimulating and fun to do, then I really want to do it. And I used to be quite apologetic about that, because I used to think, oh, will it make sense to other people? And will they not take me seriously because I'm not being creatively monogamous to one thing? And it could be that some people don't take me seriously, but that's entirely a them issue. And I want to explore as many things as I possibly can, because it's so interesting just getting to meet more people and getting to connect in different ways with creativity. So, no, it's all just one big primordial soup. I would say, though, that the one way I manage a separation is that I have a separate location. So if I'm writing a book, I won't do it in the same place as I'm preparing for a podcast interview. I will always go out and sit in a cafe or in a different room in the house, and I find that very, very helpful. And then the other thing that I would do, which actually is just a top writing tip, is that during the pandemic I couldn't go to cafes because none of them was open. So I went to a different room in our house, I went to a spare room, and I would listen to coffee shop sounds on YouTube. There's this amazing 9-hour track on YouTube, which is sort of coffee shop sounds from New York, and it is so... The white noise is relaxing and stimulating at the same time, and it really helped. I wrote my novel Magpie entirely during lockdown, to the extent that when lockdown lifted and I was able to go back to my favourite cafes, they were too noisy, and I used to listen to the coffee shop sounds in the cafe, and that really helped me get into the zone. Thank you.
Another question? Here we are. Thank you.
Thank you. I too are a huge fan of all of your interviews and podcasts and everything that you do. And whenever I listen to your podcast, I always think, wow, this is just a brilliant conversation. And I wondered, when you're going through the process of preparing, how do you make sure that you ask the right questions to get the best out of your out of the people that you're interviewing? Is it based on the research that you do, or is it kind of organic through the conversation?
Great question. I think it's both. And I always think, whenever I listen back to an interview, oh, I just didn't ask that question, or I didn't do this right. I am very self-critical. Or I filled that silence when Lynn Barber would have been brave enough to leave it. It's a combination of both. So I do a lot of research because I'm very aware that when a guest comes on How to Fail, I'm asking them to open up about some really often difficult times in their lives, or times when they just felt vulnerable. So I want them to feel that I have done them the service and shown them the respect of knowing as much as I can about their story. I then write the introduction that I read out in front of the guest for every single episode, and that's become a kind of thing, because again, writing the introduction is very helpful for me in terms of preparing, because it makes me laser in on the things that I find interesting. And it's helpful to read it out in front of the guest, because hopefully it sets them at ease, because I'm being nice about them. And then I also have the 3 failures that they give me in advance of the recording. So that provides a structure. It provides a beginning, middle, and an end. So I was quite deliberate when I came up with the idea that that would be helpful. And then I have a couple of general areas of interest that I want to explore that will kick off the interview. And I make notes under every failure as to what questions I might want to explore there as well. But then in the interview, I seek to be very present. So although I have notes, I don't really look at them because I want to be able to respond to what they're saying and not saying, and because I want them to know that I'm truly listening to them, and often will go off on a tangent that I wouldn't have expected. And again, it's a bit like sort of reading the energy or feeling it and asking something that just sort of pops out. And that's where some of the richest conversation happens. So it's a combination.
I wish I'd heard that before I...
No, I suddenly thought, by the way, I read out the introduction from my notes. So I do that.
And I've got actually quite a book clubby question quickly. I don't know, there may be some more questions from the floor in a minute. But was just about, I know this always causes division in book clubs, is about whether characters have to be nice or not in a book. Is that, because a lot of people feel you have to have that, and I always say you don't. It, you know, it depends what kind of flavour of book it is, doesn't it?
I mean, I don't want to read a book people by nice characters who always act in expected ways, because for me, real people aren't like that. And I feel very strongly that there should be no such thing as an unlikable character. There could be a character who the storyteller hasn't explained sufficiently. Having said that, I do think there is one, like, indescribably villainous character in one of us. But who I think I kind of explain, but the main protagonist, so this is a multi-voice narrative, so there's sort of 5 characters that you hear from directly. And I hope that I have done a good enough job of telling you how they might have been damaged and why they might be acting in ways that you might not find immediately relatable. And with one of us, I gave them all a sort of redemptive arc, because for me, one of the most important human qualities is hope. And I think when I first started writing novels, because I was desperate to be taken seriously, I think there wasn't enough hope, because I was trying to be so serious that I forgot to have a sort of sense of humour about life. And then I remember listening to Anne Enright, the terrific Irish novelist, on a radio programme, and she was saying, you know, I can't relate to these writers who write very serious books and there's never any humour in them, because life is absurd. Life is funny and sad and tragic and challenging and hilarious all at the same time, and it really stuck with me. And I would put the same thing, I'd use that same framework for unlikable characters. There's just no such thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Another, here we are. Thank you.
Can I just say that I absolutely agree with you about writing in coffee houses, and I also listened to that 9 hours tape when I was writing during COVID, so
here we are.
I'm with you on that one.
Good.
And I also got married very young and had a very unhappy first marriage, purely because I did what I thought I should be doing. But I agree with you, it's been a lesson.
Are we the same person? This is amazing. What star sign are you?
Gemini?
Oh my God, I'm married to a Gemini.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go.
Happily married to a Gemini, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but what I really wanted to sort of, in my novels, I've written my main character has been a woman. And I've often been pulled up and think, how can you as a man write about a woman? I would say that my 2 editors are both women. But I sort of throw that back at you.
Yeah.
Do you feel you can genuinely write as a man? I know you can.
Yeah.
Write about men. But I just sort of feel there's somehow there's a sort of thing here.
Yeah. Can I ask what your name is? I want to know.
I don't write that under my own name.
What's your pseudonym? What's your writing name?
Alex Simons.
Oh my gosh, how exciting. Okay. And what's your latest book called?
Well, the first one is Madeline, and the second one that I'm writing at the moment is a sequel.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing all of that and listening to the same coffee shop sounds as I do. It's funny, isn't it? Because I should have been more worried about it than I was, but I've never, I just started writing as a man in my 3rd novel, Paradise City, and I found that I loved it because as a woman at that time, I suppose I was imposing limits on myself, and I wrote this bombastic billionaire character called Howard Pink, who ran this sort of chain of clothing stores. And he is the kind of person who sort of believes the world is his for the taking. And it was so liberating writing him. It was so much fun that I didn't question whether I was doing a good enough job. And subsequently, I've had men read that book and say that I did do a good enough job. And I suppose it's partly because I just thought of him as another human. And it also taught me something so instructive about myself and how I operated in the world. And I remember writing a piece for The Observer about it, I think, about how if I could just be 5% more Howard Pink in my daily life, like imagine how much more assertive and sort of strong and powerful I'd feel, because I obviously had that capacity within me to think like that. And so that was a whole process that I went through that I found very interesting. I know that you're a very sophisticated audience, and I'm about to say something incredibly crude, and I'm sorry. In The Party, which is the prequel to One of Us, I write as a man, Martin, who is struggling with his sexual identity, and he's in denial about the fact that he's in love with his male best friend. And there is one scene in which Martin gets a blowjob from a waiter at a party. And I had a very esteemed male author read an early proof of the party saying, how did you know what it's like to get a blowjob? And I was like, well, I guess I just imagined it. And that's the thing, is like, I really do firmly believe that all writers of fiction should be entirely at liberty to imagine whatever they want and imagine themselves into other people's skin, as long as they do the sufficient due diligence in order to fully and convincingly inhabit that character, which I hope I do. Blowjobs and all.
There's quite a lot of parody in some of the male characters too, isn't there? It's
Yes.
a way to parody some of the things that some men
True.
do, and I wonder whether men often ask you about your books. You just had a lovely question there.
No, actually, no, and thank you so much, because I don't often get men asking me questions, and actually female authors don't often get men reading their books or listening to their podcasts, which is a whole other issue. So I really appreciate you being here and asking that.
Anyone else? We've got time for one or two more.
Are you Marissa?
I am. It's so lovely to see you.
It's so nice to see you too. Marissa just wrote an amazing book called Best Offer Wins.
Oh.
Highly recommend.
This is not about me. We're here for you. But I am very curious what it felt like to return to the heads of these characters after so many years, because I did just put that book down, and I do sort of miss those characters. Now working on a different book. So was it sort of like a class reunion, or how did you sort of get back into the mindset of Martin and the cast from The Party?
It was so much better than a class reunion, which I find them quite depressing in real life. But Martin had never left me, is the thing that I realised. In many ways, he embodies so many aspects of me that I can't give full leash to in my actual life. And I also felt such fondness for him, because he is someone who, at his heart, simply wants to be loved, even though he goes about it in terrible ways. And so I wanted to revisit him because I wanted to give him the chance to receive love and to know himself. And what interested me particularly about the character of Martin, given the shifting cultural tides, was that he was someone who was in denial about his own sexual identity. And he was also from a certain kind of background that would have dismissed what he would think of as wokery as complete nonsense. And yet, because of what he would dismiss of as wokery, he's actually now living in a time where he is so much more accepted and included, and it actually affords him this opportunity to live as himself. And I was very intrigued by how that would manifest itself in his life. So I knew that I wanted to look at that. And there is an episode in the opening chapter in which he is confronted by cancel culture. And I was so interested by what that would mean for Martin. So I loved being back in his company. And then the odious Ben Fitzmaurice on course to become the Tory Prime Minister. Again, I was very interested by how power might have corrupted his finer nature and what that would look like if he was in the running to become Prime Minister. And then I really valued the chance to get to know Serena better. So Serena is Ben Fitzmaurice's wife. And in the party, she's a sort of more of a bit part player. And I didn't have a chance to kind of flesh her out. And one of the many things that our brilliant mutual agent Meredith encouraged me to do was to give Serena much more nuance and depth as a woman, again, of a certain class. She's packed her children off to boarding school, and she's coming to terms with a transition in her own identity as she goes through the menopause, and she fears she's losing the one thing that made her worthwhile, which is her beauty. And actually being able to sort of give her depth and sensitivity and a kind of maternal urge that she worries she's lost the opportunity to express was incredibly satisfying. It's also the first time I've written a woman going through menopause at the same time as I've been, so that was genuinely healing as well. And then I invented, like, Richard Take is an entirely new character, and I had so much fun with him because he is so lacking in self-awareness at the beginning of this novel that is the root of a lot of the comedy. And I was also using him as a vehicle to look at various MPs who have lost their jobs and gone on podcasts in black turtlenecks and claimed, well, what man hasn't felt these urges in order to rehabilitate themselves? So I really loved it. I had the most fun writing this book than I ever have before. And it's why you mentioned I leave it open-ended, and I did do that quite deliberately because I do feel compelled to maybe make it into a trilogy, albeit not immediately. But I love their company so much.
I think we may have time for one very short question. The answer doesn't have to be short.
Any Real Housewives fans? Do you want to ask me about my favourite Real
Yes,
Housewife?
here we go.
Sorry, I was going to ask this, but I felt it was too frivolous. Like, which Housewives franchise is, like, the most important to understand the best? It got too deep, and then I was like, I can't
Thank
do
you.
it.
Finally, we're getting to the subject matter that counts. Okay. For me, are you a Housewives fan? Okay, great. For me, OG Real Housewives of New York, it's just unparalleled. I think it's the greatest television programme of our times. It goes off the rails with the Black Shabbat season 14, and then they recast it all with the group of influencers and Jenna Lyons, and it just hasn't ever reached those giddy heights. So I put that top. But in my top 3, it's also like Atlanta and Beverly Hills. And I do think the newbie Salt Lake City is doing a terrific job. But I can't wait to continue this conversation afterwards because I have watched, I think, every single reality TV programme apart from Married to Medicine, which, sorry, this is like so niche, but only because there was like a glitch in my streaming app and I couldn't access it. But yeah, I would say New York, toppermost.
Superb. Thank you very much for that perfect last question.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would really love to have time now to thank Elizabeth properly for being so entertaining. And I should also say that the book is, we've talked a lot about it being funny and parodic, but it's quite moving in 2 or 3 places, so you need to steel yourself, particularly talking about Serena, I think. And some scenes are they're very believable, which is what makes them upsetting, some of the things that happen to her. Yeah. And it's also extremely beautifully and precisely written, which I certainly expected and you certainly delivered.
Vanessa, can I quote you on the reprint?
Yes.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful, thank you.
And so I invite you all to say thank you very much. Oh, by the way, before I say, please give Elizabeth a round of applause, I'd like to point out you can buy her excellent One of Us book at the back, and she's kindly agreed to stay and sign, sorry, not the back on the right, and she's agreed to stay and sign any copies that you might bring up to her. Anyway, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming
Thank you,
to do
Vanessa.
this.
This has been heaven. Thank you so much. Thank you.
The Observer.